guys, Jacob here from Jacob's Smoke Alarm Reviews and more.
Today, we have reached 50 subscribers. I know, crazy. Today is July 2nd, 2021, 3:03 p.m. Don't even need a clock, I know because I checked the time right before starting the recording. It's 3:02, so I have to assume it's like 3:03. But anyways, today, as you can probably tell, I'm actually in my fine clothing, as you can see here. We are doing one thing. Reviewing the entire history of Firex smoke alarms. Okay, so we're going to split this entire video into 5 sections. This current period is the intro. Period 2 is going to be 1974 to 1979, 1980 to 1989, or actually the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and 2000 to 2009. So yeah, let's get started. You may think that the Firex FXB-1, this is the first guard by the way, is actually the very first Firex alarm because it's the oldest one you can find. No. The oldest Firex known to mankind, which is the very first one that actually has a patent, would be the Firex FX00001. The FX000001, as I call it, is an alarm like this, except that it's hardwired and does not have a test button. It's essentially the Firex model FX1014, a non-interconnecting direct wire version, and I'll post that up right here. So yeah, we could, that was supposed to be a diagram of what it was supposed to be. Okay, so the box for it would have looked like this. And the very first rebrand, the box for it, we don't know. The alarm, we don't know. We think it looks like this, but a much wider design, or possibly smaller design. And we have reason to believe that it's a Kobishi CLB26,
Referring to the FX0001 of this description.
AC vibratory horn. Since I'm basically the Firex enthusiast here, and the only one that takes Firex. So yes, and around the time of the Firex FXB-1, the OG version that has a tiered test button, and a Kobishi CLB27 horn. This is around the time when Firex's first rebrander came along, First Guard. First Guard rebranded the FXB-1 to be the FG1. So yes, the FG1 is essentially the FXB-1, just with a different back, and nobody really knows why. So yes, and this is 1976 when they first released the FXB-1. They discontinued the FXB-1 in 1979. This alarm was made between 1980 and 1981. Or no, 1982, my bad. And it would have looked like this. It would have had a tiered test button that was pushable, and it would have been like this. So very cool alarm. And this is an actual FXB-1A, as you can see. It no longer has the discontinued 70s Firex logo that was used. Unfortunately, that logo was not used anymore. It was only used for the Firex And now on to the last 70s model of Firex ever made. The FXC-1. Now there is no photo of a FXC-1, aka Jesse, aka JDL Productions has one, but he's not wanting to share it with me right now. So yeah, I can't show you, but if it does happen to be shown, I'll post it here right now. The bracket would have used the same bracket as the FG1, or the FXB-1, and the FXC-1, except that the FXC-1 had a little notch where the cord could hang out. So yes, a very cool thing indeed. And we can put away the FXB-1 now. The 1980s has brought us some incredibly cool alarms. We stuck with this design all the way up till now. And now we get the FX1020, the FXW1, the FXW1A, and more importantly, the FXB-1A, the FXB-1A second generation, the FXB-1A third generation. I'll get more into that later on. So yes, we have the FXW1. This alarm, the FX1014. The FX1014 would have been an alarm that would look like this, except that it would have a full-length wire harness without interconnect. It would have had a full-length harness, just like an FX1020, but without interconnect. And it would have had the wires come out like this, with no connection, whatsoever. Would have had a tiered test button. Would have tested exactly like this. Had the Kobishi CLB26 AC vibratory horn. And that brings us right into the FXW1. The FXW1 would be this alarm right here, made by Firex in 1980 through 1983. They used this alarm as their first interconnecting Firex alarm. That would have had the quick connect style harness, and if you look right behind me, you can find that the other end of the harness is in there. So yes, Firex has been great so far, keeping it straight with its models and all that kind of great stuff. The FX1020. The FX1020 that we know and love today was a sensational hit, running from 1983, possibly 1982 to 1990. That is the longest running Firex alarm yet, and had very user-friendly stuff compared at the time. A connecting style harness with a mounting bracket, instead of having alarms that would only be directly connected onto the PCB, say, and other alarms that would have had the quick connect style harness and other alarms. Firex made this standard, though there were W versions of BRK models, but this isn't BRK. You got the FX1020, and this is not a very good example, but this is a base alarm that would have been used in thousands of houses and would have been standard. This was a great alarm as its compact size, its user-friendly features with a domed test button. All FX1020s had a domed test button, except for very early variants. And it would have had this type of harness that would have been used as part where you plug it in, and then plugs in. Bam, you get power to the unit. There's no other way. And it's interconnect. Line voltage interconnect. Not LVR, right? What was I thinking? Line voltage interconnect feature. It was standard all the way since the FXW1, Firex's very first model that featured interconnect. It would have used line voltage interconnect, which would have been on average 45 volts DC across the interconnect line. And then when one test button was pushed, all others
FireX alarms did not, when line voltage interconnect does not power the horn, it powers a relay in the smoke alarm that then activates the alarm. Sorry for any confusion.
So yes, we can see on the back, it uses the same mounting bracket as yet our FG1 uses. Still haven't changed that. And this is a first generation through second generation FX1020. This one I'm holding in my hand is a second generation FX1020. And this is around the time in 1986, sadly, FireX was acquired by Maple Chase. So we no longer have alarms saying under.
We now begin the Maple Chase era.
FireX's corporation. We now have alarms under Maple Chase's corporation. But yet, the address stayed the same. So what happened there? We'll get more to that after 2000s. I'll go into more detail about history of the brand itself. So if you want to stick around that far, go ahead and skip to whenever it happens. I don't know. So yes, the FX1020 was a sensational hit. And when you had the FXW1A, which was another alarm identical to the FX1020, when it came around, it was also a sensational hit, being used on the top of many, being mainly used on ceilings, while FX1020s generally were more on walls. I don't know why, it's just that contractors usually put FXW1s, because that was a contractor alarm. The FX1020 was actually a retail brand. So if you didn't know, the FireX FXW series was actually a contractor brand, and that's why they were put on ceilings. The FX1020s were put on walls more because, well, convenience. Yeah, convenience. Nobody wanted to get up on a ladder and do it, so they wanted to put it on a wall. That's why you see more FX1020s on the wall than on the ceiling. Alright, our next alarm. The third generation variants of every alarm. And I'll be right back with that alarm. Now that we're back, we have our FX1020. Now, there may be no noticeable difference at first, but when you look at their sides, you can see that this no longer has the ring on the back, as it's for the face. This is when Maple Chase really took over and stopped using FireX Corporation's old brackets. These were finally discontinued and finally replaced with a much better designed harness. Bracket, I meant. One that would have looked like this. This is the new bracket that would have been used on FX1020s and FXW1As. Both third generation variants. And so yes, you would still have that base, but then it would be able to. And the reason why these are even bigger of a sensational hit was because of these slots right here. These slots enabled you to be able to put the alarms on without having to take the screws off. So yes, that was a very good thing. A lot of controversy. These alarms generally had a much more raspy horn in them, rather than the old, these old FX1020s having a much less raspy horn. That's one thing to be grateful about, I guess. At least we still had these. BRK themselves weren't even manufacturing AC horns anymore and putting them out. They were using piezos. FireX was still in the golden age of using AC horns. AC and DC horns, except that their FXB 1A would have used piezos. So I guess, yeah, their FXB-1 that I showed you earlier does use a piezo. And
the FireX G6 and G18 both make their debut in 1988.
The FX10. One last thing about the FX1020. There's the FXW1A that I have that's actually the same thing as this, except that it's not in showcase worthy right now. It's currently... oh no. It's not in showcase worthy. But now that we've gotten this, and now we transition. The 90s provided a great era when it came to the safety plans for smoke alarms. FireX finally discontinued their line of AC vibratory mechanical products, and in turn created this alarm, the FX1218. The FX1218 is an alarm designed by Maple Chase themselves. There was a Jameson rebrand of every single, not every single, but Jameson rebranded a lot of FireX's alarms. The G18, they rebranded the FX1218 as the CD32, the G18 as the G18, code 12000 G18, and then the FXB, they rebranded it as a CD1, CD2, and CD3. And it uses the old FX1020 cover. Now the covers... The FX1218 was released by FireX in 1990 as its very, very first AC-DC alarm, which would have meant it couldn't use an AC. The FX1214 also exists. The FX1214 would have been a non-interconnecting version of the FX1218 horn anymore. And when the codes changed, when BRK developed their 86 RAC, FireX created an alarm in turn. They did this, and it would no longer feature the buzzer, and it would no longer sound like this. Now, the alarms will sound like this, coming from FireX. And now we get into Style Line era. Now this is gonna... Stylining era was included in 1988, but I forgot to mention that. I am referencing at this point the FireX AD12538B as the style line. The AD series. But we'll come back to that in a minute. First, we gotta talk about FireX's last AC-only alarm, the G6 and G18, respectively.
The FXWR was released in 1995, making it the last hardwired alarm FireX would make that was AC only. The FXWR is the successor to the FX1020 and FXW1, technically.
Were FireX's last known AC only alarm, but one exception. There was multiple variants of this. The G6, the G18, and the PG40, and the H. The Model H is a G6 without interconnect. So it'll look exactly like this, but without interconnect. So if you can imagine that. Model H's are very, very rare, so I don't have one. Though one popped up on eBay, but I never was able to get it. So yes, the G6 used a new and improved design, also known as the Style Line design. And it differed from the FX1218 in one way. Definite one way. It had lines. It was stylish. It had a new and improved harness that wasn't the size of the alarm itself. And more importantly, even smaller. About the same thickness of your hand. And these were ionization alarms, though I didn't mention any photoelectric alarms. There's a one alarm that oh boy. So yeah. We have the G6. This would do the same coding as an FX1218, so if you would push down on the button, obviously nothing would happen. Because it's hardwired only. You can't fit a battery. Actually, you can fit a battery in here, it's just nobody did it. And in 1994, they introduced the Model A, B, C, D, E, and PB. All of those alarms are pretty much confusing sounding, but I'll give you a quick rundown on all of them. The Model A is a 461 Model A, which would have had a white button and would have done 5-6, also known as this coding. Model B is a clear test button version and would also do 5-6. Model C, not too sure why there's different models, but Model C is essentially the Model B with a silencer button. No. Model C. Model C is just a Model B. The Model D would have been an escape light version. And a Model PB is a photoelectric version of the Model B. Okay, moving on to 1995's FireX Model AD. And I'll show a picture of it right now. The Model AD is an alarm that was designed by FireX that used an enlarged version of the Model G6, but instead kept the styline design and would still continue having the gray and would still continue having the gray-white slash pattern on the box. And then in 1998, the AD 120 538B would have been discontinued and succeeded by the Model AD 120 1070. The 120 1070 is an alarm designed by FireX Maple Chase. Oh god, there's a bee right there. There is a big bee, a couple of bugs, and they're making their way towards me. Uh-oh. Oh, well. Okay, so FireX made by Maple Chase. Anyways, FireX by Maple Chase created the 120 1070, which would have been a styline alarm just like the 120 538B, except it would have had this design. would have this design right here, and would use the new and improved bracket designed for it as well. Oh, this wasn't new and improved, but still. The 125 that... Okay. Let's start all of this over. The 12538B is the very first AD smoke alarm and was developed into be the very first Styline alarm that had AC/DC backup. It would have looked like this right here. Had all the lines around, and then the test button right here would have had it all green as well. On the back would have said Firex model AD 12538B, though this is an ADC model. So you can see here it uses Firex's new mounting bracket. New slim mounting bracket, and then they redid the base so that it came out more just like an older FX 1020. And now that Firex has done this, you got a slim AC/DC alarm, unlike the FX 1218, which wasn't slim by comparison. And it's kind of unfortunate because this alarm would have also done 5.6, just as it was the industry standard in the 1990s. Like Firex did, they had solid state electromechanical AC horns. Now, it would have used a special and odd looking harness, and I'll get a picture of that for you right now. And that would have been the harness that the AD would have used. And the in 1998, when the codes changed, Firex still managed to get a 5.6 alarm, and it would look exactly like this and use the modern type of harness as well. And so, in turn, would make it so that it would look exactly like this, but do 5.6. Unfortunately, I do not own that example. That's a very rare variant mainstream model as well. So yes, when that changed, you would have still 98 alarm. It would not use the modern stamp coding like it does. And finally, the G6 and G18 were discontinued in 1999. After 13 long years of service, the G6 and G18 first generation were discontinued. Second generation with the new Temporal 3, also known as coding, that nobody liked, was purely unrecognizable as an escape plan. And in 1999, they switched over the alarm to be the AD model 120-1070B, which would have been the second which would have been this alarm right here, but without hush. That's the only difference between this ADC right here that I'm holding and the one. And finally, in 2000, they released this alarm, the 120-1072B. There's no 1072. It was just 1072B. It would have been this, and it would have done code 3. And still adapted Firex's horns problem, which was a problem ranging from the G6 all the way now. And we forgot to mention, welcome to the 2000s, the age of non-existent CRT televisions and plasma screen TVs. First alarm to be developed in 2000 would have been the ADC, which would have been this alarm here. Right here, yeah. The model ADC 1201072B. It's a very, very unique alarm, and it's one of the most common Fire-X alarms that you can get. And it's a great starter alarm if you want to become vintage and you get one of these. These are very, very, very cool alarms. Personally, I'm nostalgic for them, but... And these would have used the stamp code dates. Ones that would say 2002, Mar 7, instead of 31026, or whatever they would use. So yes, it's one cool thing. That's one of them, at least. The next thing would have been the FADC. The FADC was actually released in 1999 as a 120, as would have been released in 1999, but that's not important. In 2005, these guys were discontinued. After 5 years of service, they have been discontinued, replacing the FADC, the FADCQ, the FPAD, and the CC, the CCT, and the bunch of other Fire-X alarms that were made in the 2000s. If I didn't name one, that's on you, because you didn't tell me about it. The FADC, which would have been the original, would have been the lightweight 1182B. The 1182, I meant. And would have had no ramp-up test feature. Unlike late model G6s, they had the ramp-up test feature. And mine have, I don't. But, and then the FADC, which would have been the 4618, strangely remarking the I4618AC. But we don't mention kiddo models here. Then, early on, we would get we first get the 4718 and the 4618 and the 4718, both having a hush and both being exactly the same alarm. Nothing special about them whatsoever, except they act exactly like ADCs. They act exactly like ADCs and have hush. But they had one thing that the ADCs didn't have: a front load battery drawer. I'll show you a picture of one right now. The FADC's success was astronomical, but not as astronomical as the ADC's. The ADC series, the Skyline series, was discontinued in 2005 when FADC broke that chain, along with the FADCQ, which would have been the combination CO and carbon monoxide and smoke alarm, the FADCQ. I'm not going to be showing a pic because you can find those pretty easily, but they're rare to find in houses. But the FPAD is pretty much so rare it's non-existent. And you may have thought that I missed the 1201072C, which would have been the 4518. That would have been the ADC that I have right there. I didn't forget to mention it. There was the 4418, the 4318, which would have been the one made in 1990, except that it wasn't called the 4318. The 4418, which would have been the 1999 one. But we don't talk about 1999 models anymore. We talk about them now. We talk about 2007, when Maple Chase was finally bought out by Basis Controls. Never mind. Maple Chase was bought out by Invasys Control Systems in 2005, which led to the creation of the FADC by Invasys Control Systems. And everyone knows the unfortunate change in events in 2009 when FireX was acquired by Kidda. Man, that was a sad moment because that meant every warranty you had on any FireX alarm would have been voided. And sadly, it's just ooh, terrible. They started pulling FireX alarms off the shelves and they replaced them all with I4618 ACs, I12040s, and all kinds of other bad stuff. We don't even need to be getting into that. And now, with 2009 in our present view, that brings us to the end of FireX smoke alarms. Thank you all for watching, and once again, thank you all for the 50 subscribers that I've worked very hard for. Thank you, and have a great, awesome, well day. Bye.